Welcome in, everyone, for a Feast Week edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We've got a ton to get to. There's a ton of games this week. There is a full plate of games, as you might say, of college basketball throughout the course of the next few days. And part of that, obviously, is the number of multi-team events and tournaments that will be happening. And 7 of those tournaments, 7 of those events will involve WCC teams. So we'll preview a good chunk of that and just what those matchups are going to mean for said teams as they go through the course of the next few days. We'll sit down with Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball podcast and talk about Gonzaga specifically, but then also what he sees from the WCC as a whole. So we'll get into the previews and then, of course, the interview in just a bit. But I wanted to do a quick recap and a quick kind of overview of the past week, but really highlighting the missed opportunities that did happen over the last few days and really since Thursday, those missed opportunities that happened. And this involves USF, this involves Oregon State, and this involves Santa Clara. 3 teams that are in kind of very different positions when it comes to what their outlook is, even within the past week. USF came into the week 4-0. They were looking to add another resume win onto their slate, move to 5-0, all that sort of stuff. Santa Clara was trying to get off the mat. Santa Clara had dropped 3 straight and needed a win. Now they did get one against UC Irvine earlier in the week, but they needed to get a quality win to kind of get back out of the hole that they had started to dig. And then Oregon State renewed their rivalry with Oregon on Thursday night and came up just short. And it was really kind of like one of the few opportunities the Beavers are going to have to get a quote resume win, as that one was going to probably age pretty well as Oregon, even though I would say they probably haven't played well, are going to at least get enough of those games once they hit Big Ten play they're going to move back up the ranks and pick up some good wins. So that, again, another one of those chances that Oregon State was maybe in an opportunity to get a resume win to kind of validate all of the work that they had kind of put into this point and validate it at least with the metrics and the rankings and everything else, and came up short. But let's start with the Dons and their matchup with Memphis on Thursday night at Chase Center. And everything, for the most part, seemed to be going their way. They led by 9 at the half. They held Memphis to 22 points in that first period, 36.5% for the game. They held PJ Haggerty, who was kind of one of the highlights that I said they need to try to slow him down in some way. He had 13 points. He had 5 turnovers. He was 2 for 9 from the field. They kind of did their job there. Tyrese Hunter, 9 points, 5 assists, but 0 for 5 from 3. One of the points that was really emphasized, I tried to emphasize, was the fact that Memphis was a really good 3-point shooting team, and this was an area that they needed to try to limit them. And they did, for the most part. They did hold them in check for a lot of the game. That was not something that Memphis completely ran away from the Dons on. However, they struggled on the other side. Memphis's defense made life difficult for USF in this contest. They shot 32% from the field. They were 6 for 28 from 3. Obviously not a good number. Marcus Williams, 5.6 turnovers, 1 for 6 from the field. I'd said they might try to key in and take away Tyrone Riley. Well, they did just that. He scored 2 points. He was 1 for 7 from the field. Now, he did have 13 rebounds, so he was active in other ways, but they really held him in check on the offensive end, on the scoring front. Dweedo Newberry, he 3 for 10 from the field, 4 turnovers for him. Not a good night for the senior. But Malik Thomas was the one keeping them in this contest. He had 25 on the night. He was 14 for 17 from the free throw line. So he was just a madman attacking the basket through this one. And The missed opportunity here is that now Memphis is checking in at 29 in KenPom. This was a huge opportunity for the Dons, and it did slip away at the end of this one as the backcourt of Hunter and Haggerty did come through at the end by getting to the free throw line, by making sure that they could slow this game down to a point that put them in a position to really kind of pull away from USF late. They made a run at the beginning of the second half, which honestly was not a huge surprise, as this is something Memphis has done over the course of the first few weeks of the season. But one of these games it's almost kind of like you had it in your grasp, you had it right there, and it did slip away. Now, this is something we did see a number of times from USF a season ago. They had some of these leads and they let it slip away. But at the same time, I'm not going, this is not a panic mode for me, because I was thinking, even going into this one, that with or without this Memphis game, they're still in a good position because of the other games they still have coming up. And of course, like starting on Monday is that first test. It's going to be Clemson as part of the Sunshine Slam. They'll either get Penn State, a 5-0 Penn State team, or Fordham. So hopefully for the Dons that they can get the game against the Tigers, then they will likely play Penn State, a very good Penn State team. We'll get into both of those matchups as we talk about the Sunshine Slam in a bit. But talking about missed opportunities and not kind of closing these games out, one team has almost started to make a habit of not closing these sorts of games out, and it's Santa Clara. The Broncos did drop their game to Stanford on Saturday. This was a game in which they led by 10 at the half. This was a game where they had a lead going into the last 4 minutes of the game. And then Stanford went on a 12-2 run to close. They really had no answer for Maxime Reynaud. They had no in the first half. He had 32 points, 16 rebounds. They had no answer for Ozziah Sellers, who had 23 points, and primarily a lot of that in that second half. Santa Clara has had late leads against Arizona State, North Dakota State, Stanford. And in the final 4 minutes of each of those games, they have shot 26% from the field. They've allowed opponents to shoot 60% from the field. And even in the game in which they won, where they led down the stretch, St. Louis, and in a close contest, in the final 6 minutes of that game, they were 2 for 9 from the floor. So this is becoming a bit of a common theme, and something that the Broncos are going to need to address as they get deeper into this season. Really, like, not even deeper in the season. They have to right the ship quickly, because they too are in one of these multi-team events this coming week. They do have a couple of games that are going to test them. They start with TCU on Thursday, and on Tuesday, I should say, Thursday, they have TCU at the Acrisure Invitational, and that is an opportunity for Santa Clara to try to pick things back up where they were playing better against Stanford overall, but just could not close the deal. They couldn't close the deal multiple times over. It really just feels like that they are getting discombobulated late, and are allowing the missed shots, the not great defense to snowball on them to a point where it's causing these losses. They don't share the ball all that well. They haven't shot the ball well down the stretch in games, but it really just seems that they don't know where to go when it matters most yet. A year ago, they'd seem like, okay, just give it to Adama Ball, kind of clear out and let him do his thing. We've seen him kind of try to take over games late in contests, but that hasn't worked. I think defenses seem to be adjusting to that mindset and adjusting to what Santa Clara is trying to do. And we have yet to see that adjustment back to what they can try to do to make sure that they're actually getting better looks on the floor late in contests, because really that kind of seems like there are too many contested looks for Santa Clara late in these ball games, and they need to figure out a way to get open more often. And then lastly for me, it's Oregon State. And this is less so, again, like I'm not overly concerned about a missed opportunity here for Oregon State, because the Beavers did have a big lead in this game against Oregon. They led for most of the game. They led by as many as 12 in the second half. They led with under 7 minutes to play. And they had 2 possessions at the end of the game when they were trailing by 3, but ran plays that just, to me, made absolutely no sense when you need to actually get a 3, but ran 2 separate plays through Parsafala, who obviously is not a 3-point shooter. He has yet to take a 3 this season, and he's also a poor free throw shooter at 57% this season. And honestly, I actually don't even know why Oregon just didn't go ahead and foul him once he touched the ball late in the contest. Again, thinking about I would let him take 2 free throws rather than let anybody else on that team shoot a 3. And they didn't get a good look in either of those possessions. They did get a foul and they went to the line on one of them, but even that was it was kind of cringy to watch that play unfold, and really kind of like they got bailed out with that foul call. But they also shot 28% in the second half of that game. Now, part of that is because Oregon did look like that they were playing better defense. They picked up their intensity, whatnot. We've seen that from Oregon actually a few different times. We saw that when they played Portland a week and a half ago, because that's exactly what kind of happened in the second half of that game. First half, Portland got a lead. They got comfortable. They were looking really good. And then Oregon stepped up their defensive intensity in the second half and obviously closed that gap, ended up winning that game in overtime. But for Oregon State, this to me feels like it's not a total missed opportunity, but it's one they could have had, one that's obviously going to be frustrating to think about, but they get a great opportunity in their next game, which is Monday night, against a North Texas team on the road, a good North Texas team. And that's going to be another opportunity, probably for at least a Q2, but possibly a quad 1 win for the Beavers. Okay, so talking about these multi-team events, because there's obviously a ton of them. The Washington State is going to be playing in the Acrisure Holiday Invitational. They open up with Fresno State, and then we'll either play SMU or Cal Baptist. St. Mary's is in the Acrisure Classic. They open up with USC, and then we'll take on either New Mexico or Arizona State. Santa Clara, we've already mentioned them, that they'll be taking on TCU in the opener. And then we'll either play Washington or Colorado State in that second game. USF Sunshine Slam, already gone over them. LMU will have started the Cancun Classic, and they open up with Belmont in that one. Pepperdine is at the Arizona tip-off. And then, of course, the big one is Gonzaga is at the Battle for Atlantis, and that they will get 3 games in for that tournament. They will open with West Virginia. And this Gonzaga team, obviously, they're 5-0, rolling into this tournament. Big win against San Diego State on Monday, which we talked about last week. And this is going to be, obviously, another great test for the Zags. This is, I think, going to really test their depth night in, night out, and really test the versatility of this team. You have a West Virginia team that is going to challenge them in one way. They possibly will get Indiana in game 2, which might be the most challenging of the teams in this tournament for matchup purposes. And then there's the possibility of Arizona in a championship game, or even somewhere in that tournament, possibility of Arizona. So great opportunities for the Zags. But let's talk with Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags podcast, and he will kind of let us fill in us on what he sees for the Zags going through this tournament, and maybe what could be some of the pitfalls for this squad. A lot's going to be happening during Feast Week. Obviously, one of those is that Gonzaga will be heading to the Battle for Atlantis. And to kind of preview that and get ready for this week, bringing in Andy Patton from Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball podcasts. And Andy, we got a lot to talk about with the Zags, and I'm going to start off with the performance we saw with San Diego State on Monday night. And it was a matchup that obviously was highly anticipated going in. Yes, San Diego State was banged up, not having obviously Reese Waters available was something they knew going in. But this was an 11.5 point spread on that, which is a wild spread. But the Zags went in, they got a win, not your traditional way in which you see the Zags do it. But what did you see from this team on Monday, and what does that kind of say for them going into next week or this coming week with the trip to the Bahamas?
Yeah, I think it was what I've seen coined as a professional win, and it reminded me a little bit of Gonzaga's win over USC last year in Las Vegas, where you get out to an early lead and you just kind of never let the team get all the way back into it. Like this game, especially in the second half, I think it was Gonzaga never led by more than, I think, 14, and San Diego State never got within like 8 in the second half of this game. It was just, it was between 8 and 12, 13 points, literally the entire second half. And I think that was just Gonzaga's way of being able to kind of keep this team at arm's length. And I didn't expect them to pull away on the road against a team like San Diego State. They're a well-coached team. Brian Dutcher's very good at what he does. That obviously the team was at home, so that helps. But I also I never felt like San Diego State really had a chance of winning that game in the second half. And for a lot of the first half either. Gonzaga got their lead, and just every time they needed a big shot, every time they needed a key play, they got it. Whether it was Ben Gregg grabbing offensive rebounds, whether it was Graham Ike having a tremendous, incredible second half, the best performance he's had this season by, a lot. It's not even close. Whether it was Ryan Nembhard having another double-double, 19 points and 10 assists for him. This team just, the San Diego State team's down. They're not as good as they've been the last couple of years. I think even when they're healthy, they won't be quite at that level, but this is still a good team in a very tough road environment. Gonzaga's first road game last year was at Washington, who was not as good of a team as this San Diego State team, and Gonzaga did not win that game. And the issues that year were depth. They didn't have the depth to win a game like that. The freshmen, Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer, really struggled in that game. And in this game, that wasn't an issue. They didn't look nervous. They didn't look afraid of the road environment, and the depth was so strong that they were able to, sub out Graham when he got those early fouls and then go back to him in the second half. And you have guys like Ben Gregg, who is a little bit fresher because he's not playing 35 minutes a game. Like, you can just feel that depth is so significant. And when you talk about what it means going into Atlantis, 3 games in 3 days, a lot of teams really struggle with that. And for Gonzaga to have the depth that they do, where they can turn to Huff and Stromer and even Emmanuel Innocente in a pinch if they need to, like, that just puts this team in such a good spot heading into an event like that.
Now, you mentioned Graham Ike a couple different times, and this was obviously like his best game of the season. The one thing I was really impressed by was actually as he came back in late in the first half, how he played well with those 2 fouls. He still was pretty aggressive on the defensive end, but was still able to, like, one of the things, he gets in the foul trouble pretty often. The fact that he was able to play with those 2 early on, I thought was really impressive. And then, of course, like the offensive outburst in the second half, but it also kind of was the reminder that even as great as Braden Huff had been the first like 2 weeks of the season, it's like you're reminded, oh, right, Graham Ike actually is still like one of the best players in college basketball with that performance we saw. What did you like, again, like thinking about like Graham Ike's performance in that second half and in that game as in total? You talked about the depth, like thinking about, just talk about Ike a little bit more and just say how like what we've seen from him in the last week or so, because honestly it feels like the pressure just hasn't been on him as much because of that depth.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think for Graham, the fouls are the biggest issue for him. They were an issue last year. I think last year he was babied a little bit early in the year just because he'd missed that entire previous season with the injury. And so they were kind of cautious of, I think he played like 22, 24 minutes per game in the first half of the year. And then the second half, it didn't really tick up, even though his performance got better. And that's because, every other game or every third game, he would have to sit for like half of the first half because he had those fouls. And Mark Few's very consistent about sitting you with two fouls in the first half, and he rarely brings guys back in. But he didn't have a choice when Graham got his second foul 75 seconds into the game against San Diego State. Like, you're not going to play Braden for 18 and a half minutes. I don't think he's got the conditioning to do that, or at least not at a high level. And I think you're absolutely right that Graham's ability to come into that game and not pick up a third foul was critical. Everything that happened in the second half may not have happened if Graham had picked up that third foul early or at some point in that first half. So his ability to avoid that was crucial. I think that these two guys play off each other well. Braden's such a dynamic offensive player. He's got a variety of skills offensively. He can get score around the rim. He's a better 3-point shooter. He makes good decisions with the basketball, which was a bit of an issue for him last year. But Graham is stronger. Graham is tougher defensively. I think Braden has improved in that area, but Graham is better in that area. Now, obviously, Graham's a little too aggressive, and that's what leads to the foul issues that we see from him so often. But the two of them play off each other really well, but it's still Graham's, front court. He's still the guy. He's still, the first name on the scouting report, at least in the front court for Gonzaga. And Braden offers it a little bit of a different look, a little bit more versatility, but this team's going to live and die by what Graham can do down on the block.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about like that scouting report on the front court. Now, in the back court is obviously Ryan Nembhard, who has had an amazing start to the season. Mm-hmm. Through those first 4 games, the 40 assists, five turnovers, ridiculous totals. Obviously, I think there was the number out there that the only one with such numbers across any level of basketball was Chris Paul about 10 years ago, which is when you're a point guard in a class with only Chris Paul, you're doing something right. What is he the best point guard in the country? Obviously, like there's a really short list of guys who are going to be on that. But I mean, as of right now, I'm like, he's looking like, I think the guard that we might have thought we were going to see from the get-go a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ryan Nembhard is the best point guard in the country. And I think the start to the season, not only is it historic, like you said, the comparison with Chris Paul and the amount of assists and the lack of turnovers, but this isn't a typical non-conference start to the schedule for Gonzaga either. Like, they've played the strongest non-conference schedule of any team in the KenPom top 25. They were the only team in the top, like, I think there's 2 teams in the top 90 that had played a top 75 schedule, and it's basically Gonzaga and Baylor were like the only 2 teams that had. And so for Ryan Nembhard to be putting up this kind of production when you're playing teams like Baylor, who just picked up that huge win over St. John's, or when you're playing teams like Arizona State, who's a good quality team that has been better in the early going than people thought, or San Diego State on the road, which is a tough game. Like, again, Purdue has played a tough schedule now, and Braden Smith is certainly the other name that I think is going to be tossed out here a lot. And it's hard because they're not very similar players. Like, Braden Smith's got twice as many rebounds per game. It's like, okay, I'm not judging these 2 point guards based on how many rebounds they're getting. Like, that doesn't really matter to me, but it is like a relevant thing. And I think, Braden is asked to take on a bigger scoring role for Purdue, especially now with Zach Edey gone. So he's got more points per game. He's got less assists per game, and he's got more turnovers per game. And to me, I think Ryan's a better pure point guard in the kind of traditional sense of like pass first point guard, not necessarily dictating the scoring for the team as much as the facilitation and getting out in transition and things like that. When you compare him to point guards who kind of fill that role, there aren't any better than him. DeJuan Harris is kind of another name for Kansas who does that and is very good in that role. There are some other very, very good point guards in this game. Elliot Cadeau at North Carolina is fantastic, playing off a very strong scoring guard in RJ Davis. But to me, in terms of like what you want out of a point guard in that traditional sense, there's nobody doing it better than Ryan Nembhard. There are some great guards, Mark Sears, RJ Davis, others that we haven't mentioned that are kind of more off-ball guards in some ways. But yeah, I would take, if I was building a team and I had to pick a point guard, I would take Ryan over all of them.
Yeah, it's been incredible to watch. Again, like we've seen him like on how he's led that offense, been the distributor, and just the ridiculous numbers They've been off the chart in the first half of the season. And of course, that tough schedule is going to continue as they head into the battle for Atlantis this coming week. And they will have almost a full week off going into this tournament with, again, talk about the depth of this team. And now you get a full week off going into this one. What's the outlook as they head into the opener against West Virginia, and then as what you might see deeper into this tournament?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a good tournament. It always is. Atlantis, Maui, and now the Players Era Festival seem to be the ones that have the most kind of loaded concentration of talent. Right now, I think the matchup that everybody wants is Gonzaga versus Arizona. That's what everybody's hoping for. Obviously, Mark Few, Tommy Lloyd. Tommy worked at Gonzaga for 20 years under Coach Few. It would be an incredible, incredible game. And they set up the bracket to try to get that matchup. Nobody's hiding that. They were also the two best teams, and you typically put the two best teams on the opposite side of the bracket, so it's not like it was manipulation or anything. For Gonzaga, they'll have to get past West Virginia and then either Indiana or Louisville. For Arizona, they got Davidson, and then they're playing either Providence or Oklahoma. I think Gonzaga's the better team. I think Arizona has the better path to getting to that championship game. I don't think Providence or Oklahoma, frankly, are all that good. They're both undefeated, but neither team has played. I think I just ran the numbers. I think the only team that either of them have played that's in the top 250 at KenPom is Green Bay, who Oklahoma played, and they're like 242nd. Or sorry, who Providence played. Either way, 9 combined wins. None of them are quality wins for either of those two teams. Arizona, who has not looked great, they gave up 100 points to Wisconsin. We're recording before the Duke game, so we're not sure how that's going to look for them. But I think that Arizona team is good, and I think they have a nice path to that championship. Gonzaga, the team that worries me the most is Indiana. I'm not overly concerned about West Virginia. I think Darian DeVries is a good coach, and I think that team is decent, but I don't think they have they just don't have the talent to compete with Gonzaga, and I think that'll bear itself out in that game. But assuming Indiana gets by Louisville, which isn't a guarantee, Louisville's a kind of a sneaky, tough team to plan against because they're so new, and the roster hasn't really played that much together and only played one good team up to this point. But if Indiana gets by Louisville and Gonzaga plays Indiana, Indiana has size. They have Umar Ballo, former Zag, in the front court. He's one of the best at being able to potentially limit what Graham Ike can do. They have length on the perimeter. Mackenzie Mbako is an absolute star in the making. He's having a prolific sophomore year. He's like a 6'9" three-point shooting wing. He's a matchup nightmare for Gonzaga. They really could have used Anton Watson on this roster for one more year because that's who would guard him, and he'd do a good job. But without him in the mix, that he's going to be a tough matchup for them. So I think Indiana's going to give Gonzaga some fits, and I think it's going to be a more challenging game. But ultimately, I think the Zags have enough talent and enough offensive firepower, especially against a Hoosiers team that really doesn't shoot the three all that well. I think that's where Gonzaga's advantage lies. I think they win. I think they play Arizona in the championship. And I think a whole heck of a lot of eyeballs are going to be on that game.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that airs the reuniting of Tommy Lloyd and Mark Few would be an exciting thing to watch. Obviously, Tommy's kind of avoided this game to this point, or tried to avoid facing his old head coach. So if we do end up seeing it, that'd be exciting to watch. So we'll transition from the Zags to the team who's going to be in the battle for Atlantis next year, and that is St. Mary's. And I wanted to get your impressions on kind of like who's been the breakout star in a sense over the last week has been Mikey Lewis. And there's been a lot of chatter, especially among St. Mary's folks, that this kid might already be better than Aiden Mahaney. What's your read on him? And honestly, because it does feel like they haven't missed a beat, Mahaney or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to make that comparison, in particular with Mahaney struggling in a new system over at UConn, which I think a lot of people projected might happen. Now we'll see. It's very early in the season, but UConn also has not played a difficult schedule up to this point, so it'll be interesting to see how Mahaney looks when they start playing some of those better teams. They're going to be in Maui this year, and they're going to play some really good squads there. But Mikey Lewis has been great. He's been great, and I think St. Mary's has played a competitive non-conference schedule. They've played good mid-major teams. They also played a good Nebraska team and got a W there. I really like what we've seen from Mikey Lewis. He's fearless, which is a lot like Mahaney, who kind of came out of the gates immediately as a freshman and was kind of established himself as a go-to option for Randy Bennett's offense instantly. And you don't see a lot of freshmen do that. And yet for Mahaney to do that as a freshman, and then now, just 2 years later for Mikey Lewis to to kind of be able to take on that same mantle. I mean, he had the 23-point outburst, 5 of 7 from 3 against Nebraska. I mean, that to be that confident, to be able to knock down 5 out of 7 threes against your first power conference opponent, I mean, that takes some stones. And Mikey Lewis is a kid that I think is going to be, if he stays, the same way we kind of thought if Mahaney stays, he's going to be in that, echelon of elite guards in Randy Bennett's history with McConnell and Patty Mills and Dellavedova and Ford and Nar and all those guys. And of course, Mahaney didn't stick around long enough to do that. And Marcelonis is kind of in that group now, but Mikey Lewis already looks the part. He already looks like that caliber of player for this team. I think we'll want to see more from him as they get into some of the meat of their schedule, play some, once they get into conference play and there's more scouting on him and things like that. He's not much of a facilitator or distributor at all. He has 4 assists on the season. So that's not really an area that he's a scorer. He's a shooter. That's what he's looking to do. If he can round out his game a little bit more, I think he could absolutely be a better player than Mahaney. I think there's a strong argument that he is already there. But I think it's still early enough in his career that I think we want to see a little bit more from him. But would it surprise me if he ends up being in that conversation? Not at all. No.
So, as a Zag fan, when you see some St. Mary's guard like this, another one, or is it, oh no, here we go again? Or what's when you, again, thinking about what Mikey Lewis already is and the breakout he's had, then again, comparing him to maybe some of the others of the past of is there just this, oh no thought that's starting to run through you?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think the thing for St. Mary's is that Bennett's a very good coach and he knows how to exploit mismatches with Gonzaga and kind of, pick apart their defense. And that's something that Mahaney was very good at doing from a coaching perspective of, okay, let's get him downhill. Let's get him going towards the basket. Gonzaga doesn't have those rim protectors. So the kinds of guards who can really exploit whatever Gonzaga's weakness is, I think have been a huge thorn in Gonzaga's side, whether it's Dellavedova, whether it's Mickey McConnell, Patty Mills, all those guys have done it throughout their career and have kind of created this rivalry. I mean, this rivalry doesn't exist without some elite guards in the last 15, 20 years for the Gales. But I think a big part of it is how they game plan against Gonzaga and kind of pinpoint those things. For this year, Gonzaga's defense looks pretty good, yet we have seen some teams that have exploited them with a ton of ball movement, swinging the ball around. Some bigger guards have exploited them as well. So I think that's going to be the big question. Lewis he's not super big. He's probably about the same size as Nolan Hickman. So I think, he won't be able to exploit necessarily in that way, but I think his ability to space the floor and hit open threes, I mean, if Gonzaga is slow on their rotations like they were against Arizona State, a guy like Lewis absolutely becomes a villain real quick if he shoots 5 of 7 like he did against Nebraska.
So I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this one. I want you to kind of rank some of these St. Mary's guards on fear factor. Again, that doesn't even necessarily mean what we've seen in performance, but once they're on the floor or if they have the ball in their hands late in the game, it's what level of anxiety starts to set in. And I'll just roll through some of the names maybe I'm going to miss one and maybe you want to add one. I'll go with the Aiden Mahaney, Mickey McConnell, Patty Mills, Jordan Ford, obviously Matthew Dellavedova. How would you rank them? And maybe just give me the top 3 of what you're thinking.
Man, I think the top 2 that pop in my head are probably McConnell and Delly. Maybe that's just because that's when I was at Gonzaga, and so I was feeling that dread in the student section watching those 2 guys when they were on the floor. Obviously, I distinctly remember McConnell's game winner at the Kennel, but those 2 guys were so mistake prone. They were so good at taking care of the ball. They didn't cough it up. They didn't, they were so reliable with the basketball in their hands in late game situations. And you just felt like, okay, this is a team that's calm, it's cool, it's collected. These 2 guys are going to lead this team to what they need to get done. And if, a close game at the end, those are the last 2 guys I wanted to see have the basketball. Third after that is close. Patty was obviously really, really good, but I think I might lean with Mahaney just because of how he was somebody who played up against Gonzaga. Some of these other guys did too, but Mahaney's career numbers against Gonzaga compared to the rest of his career in Moraga was pretty dramatic. And that's a big hats off to him when you can play up against those kind of opponents. I'll tell you right now in the Locked On Zags Discord channel, we're talking about this UConn team or this upcoming game. Everybody's convinced that Aiden Mahaney is going to score 25 points against Gonzaga. Everybody is convinced that that's going to happen because that's what he did at St. Mary's. And it's when you're somebody who just who just has that juice to play up against that kind of opponent. Like, it makes you extra dangerous. I think Jordan Ford's probably a better player than Aiden Mahaney. Patty Mills definitely is. I think there's an argument that even some of the other guards, Marcelonis maybe, or Nar, are better players than Mahaney as well. But he really played up in those games against Gonzaga, and I think that kind of puts him higher on the fear factor list.
Yeah, and it was kind of amazing, just the stark contrast of like Mahaney versus Gonzaga and Mahaney versus everybody else. Obviously, Mahaney's numbers against everybody else were still good numbers, but just it was the wild swing of how much better he really did like see red whenever Gonzaga was across the court. And now we talked about Gonzaga, talked about St. Mary's, and one of the things going in, we've seen some good performances from others in the conference, and I'm kind of starting to look at, is there a third team right now after 2-ish weeks of play that you see who could be maybe that third team, and who do you like best amongst everybody else to maybe make that run?
Yeah, it's tough. Obviously, San Francisco's loss to Memphis really hurt their kind of candidacy, and it wasn't a bad loss. As we said before we hit the record button, they moved up in KenPom even after losing to Memphis in a pseudo home game at the Chase Center. So it's not like it's a bad loss, but the problem when you're a mid-major team is that any loss is a bad loss. Like, you just like that's if I'll use Clemson since I know San Francisco is about to play them, or Wake Forest, or any other team that's probably going to end up in the bubble. A loss to Memphis is, people barely even register it. Like, they barely even talk about it as that doesn't really matter. But for San Francisco, it does. It's going to be used as a negative against them, for better or worse. And obviously part of that is the lack of other competitive games, but San Francisco's got a good schedule. They got Clemson coming up. If they win that game, they could play Penn State as part of their MTE, the Sunshine Slam, I believe it is. They already have a nice win over Boise State. Like, this is a team that I think has the combination of talent, coaching. Chris Gurleson's one of the best in the business, and schedule to actually make a run and be good enough to make the NCAA tournament. They still got to be, probably at least 500 against Gonzaga and St. Mary's combined. They probably don't have any other losses in them, or maybe one. Maybe you take one loss to Wazoo, split with Gonzaga St. Mary's. If you don't lose it, if you beat Clemson and Penn State and you do that, maybe you sneak in. But the path is just so difficult, especially without that win over Memphis. But I still think they're the third best team in the league, and I think they're still the best set up team. Wazoo is, they've only played one really good team at this point in Iowa, and they lost that game. Their other wins just haven't been all that impressive. We'll see if Bradley looks better as the year goes on. But they got Boise State, they got Washington, they got Nevada, they got some opportunities to pick up some wins, but they feel like they're in a fairly precarious spot just without a super competitive schedule. Santa Clara has already, I think, blown their opportunity. They already have 3 losses on the year. I don't think they're in that conversation anymore, unfortunately. So for me, it's kind of down to Wazoo and San Francisco, and I think the Dons are slightly better set up for it. But the tone of this conversation would be a lot different if they'd managed to find a way to beat Memphis on Thursday evening.
Anything for Oregon State? Because honestly, had they actually gotten away with that win against Oregon on Thursday, that would have been a 5-0 Oregon State team, and maybe.
Yeah, Oregon State, I think, is probably not there because I don't think they're going to be good enough to do what they need to do in conference play. Again, I think for Oregon State, with looking at their non-conference schedule going forward, I mean, they got North Texas Monday. That's a decent team, top 75 at KenPom. If they can win, and that's a road game for them. If they win that one on the road, that's a potential quad 1, at least a quad 2 win for them. But outside of that, they got UC Irvine. I think that's a good team. That would be a nice win, but it's not, a sexy win in the sense that the committee's going to be like, ooh, okay, well, they beat Irvine. So we're, that's just not how it's going to be viewed or treated. So they got Charleston on the neutral, which I think will be solid as well. But I think this Oregon State team would have to be pretty close to perfect. Again, the win over Oregon would have really helped, but they blew that one in the late game there and weren't able to pick it up. But I'm not confident that Wayne Tinkle and the Beavers are going to be good enough to get into that conversation. I think they're kind of right in the middle of the conference, and I think will be decent this year. I think they'll, be well over 500 in league play. KenPom projects them to be 18-11. That feels about right, but there's no way an 18-11 Oregon State team gets into the NCAA tournament. It's just not going to happen.
Had they been in the other conference, maybe not in this, not in the WCC.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty to chew on with the games we have coming up this week. We start feast week, and so there'll be a lot of great games. I'm going to be probably either glued to the TV, to this, to my phone, like having multiple games on. I'm sure you're going to be doing the same all weekend long. Thanks, Andy, for hopping on. It's always great to chat with you. Zags will be starting the battle for Atlantis. I believe it's on Wednesday, starting with West Virginia down in the Bahamas. So thanks again for hopping on, and we'll definitely catch up.
Thanks, Zach. Always fun to be on.
Want to thank Andy one more time for hopping on and talking about the Zags and really what we're going to see from them this coming week. A ton of basketball, obviously, throughout the course of Thanksgiving week. And the next biggest matchup, again, like looking at going down that kind of power ranking list, is going to be St. Mary's at the Acrisure Invitational. Acrisure Classic. There's a ton of these Acrisure tournaments happening all in Palm Desert this week. So St. Mary's is in the Classic, which starts on Thursday, on Thanksgiving Day. And they open with USC. And this USC squad is 5-1 coming into the week. And 84 in Ken Palm. This is a team that played Gonzaga, obviously, in an exhibition before the season started, and did get a win, but you don't oversell an exhibition win when teams are trying to do a bunch of different things and nothing is really kind of settled. Now, they are 5-1, but when you look at the who, they've played Chattanooga, Idaho State, UT Arlington, San Jose State, Grambling State. At least those are their wins, the 5 wins. Their one loss is a 5-point defeat to Cal. And so looking over all of this, like their average margin, point total margin is 9.5 points, which for a field like this doesn't feel like a lot. Especially when you look at the fact that they have yet to face a top 100 team. Their 6 opponents have been 172, 234, 188, 121, 285, and 222. So I'm not leaning too much onto the victories. What I am going to look at is what they have bringing back for a squad that does have a ton of transfers, but what it also brings is a lot of experience. Largely our 7-man rotation. No one else averages more than 10 on that squad, but 5 of those 7 are grad students. So there is a ton of experience with this group. This is a team that shoots 33% from three-point range, so not a great three-point shooting team, but they're also not going to beat themselves. Less than 10 turnovers per game to this point in the season. So this is going to be a game where you're going to have to be on point. And of course, St. Mary's, as we know, is another one of those incredibly efficient teams. They don't turn the ball over a lot. So that's going to make this actually a very interesting matchup on the ball control aspect. Now, one of the things I think St. Mary's does have a pretty big advantage on is going to be on the rebounding front. USC to this point, their rebounding margin is minus 1.3, so they're about even with their opponents at this stage of the season. St. Mary's, on the other hand, is the 6th best in the country at a plus 14.8 per game rebounding margin. And of course, there was the one game where I think they were plus 20, 25, 28, something like that. So they've also, of course, had like one outlier, but this is a St. Mary's team that we know rebounds well between Saxon and Morauskas and Barrett. This is a good rebounding team. At least, so some of the components that they're going to look at, some of the guys that they're going to have to keep their eyes on. Terrence Williams, the second, he came back. He missed the first couple of games, but he's been shooting 60% from the field in the last 4. He had 18 against UT Arlington, 20 against San Jose State. So this is someone, a 6'7" forward, someone we're going to have to keep an eye on. Someone who's going to be kind of filling in the stats in a bunch of different ways. Desmond Cloud, 6'6" guard, 51% from the field so far, 12.8 points, 3.5 assists per contest. He had a season high 26 against UT Arlington. A lot of those higher points are against UT Arlington because I think they scored like 98 in that game. And a familiar name, a familiar face is going to come across. Chibuzo Agbo, who was at Boise State a year ago, 6'7", graduate student. He's had 20-plus points in each of his last 2 games, and he's been taking more than 6 threes per game. So this is one of the few guys you're going to have to pay attention to on the perimeter and really make sure that you're keeping an eye on him. And he was on a Boise State team last year that beat St. Mary's in Idaho Falls. So this is someone who comes with experience on knowing how to really play against this Gales team and against that system. And another one who's going to fill up the stat sheet, 6'7" forward St. Thomas. No, not the school. His first name is Saint. 9 points, 5.7 rebounds, 5.5 assists. He's going to fill it up. He's going to be that ball distributor for this squad. And again, looking at that matchup with USC, this is going to come down to the physicality and the length of the physicality of St. Mary's versus the length of USC. One of the things that USC did that they had that really kind of was bothersome to an extent against Gonzaga was their length. And as we have seen in the past, this St. Mary's squad has struggled at times with teams that are a little bit longer, a little bit more athletic. I think back to the Grand Canyon game in the NCAA tournament last year. That's a game where, if you're going to look at one that is kind of a point of reference of what happens when they see those sorts of teams, that's it. That said, this is something in an area, I think, on the rebounding front that St. Mary's has been able to take advantage of. If they can limit the number of shots and offensive rebounds and opportunities that USC has, they're going to be in very good position to be able to stretch this game out, slow it down, and then also be as efficient as they normally are, because obviously St. Mary's has been a much more efficient offensive team this season. They're a top 20 adjusted offensive KenPom team. So this is a squad that, while we're not used to kind of seeing this team be able to run up the score, if St. Mary's can limit the opportunities for USC and do what they do on the boards, they're going to be putting themselves in very good position to get a win on Thursday and move on to face either Arizona State or New Mexico. And just 2 guys to kind of keep an eye on both of those squads. 2 very good teams, 5-1 Arizona State, 4-1 New Mexico. And for Arizona State, the one I'm going to keep an eye on is Jaden Quintans, 6'9" forward freshman. He can jump out the gym. He's going to be all over the place. Really one of the guys that gave Gonzaga a lot of frustration early on in their matchup with them. 7.7 rebounds, nearly 4 blocks a game. That's where we have to kind of look at it, like what his impact is going to be. And again, length and athleticism against St. Mary's is something to keep an eye on. For New Mexico, a familiar name, Donovan Dent, someone that St. Mary's first saw when he was a freshman for the Lobos. This year, 18 points, nearly more than 8 assists a game. He's shooting 54%. Someone to just obviously continue to keep an eye on and know that this is going to be a matchup between he and Augustus Marciulionis, if that is end up being the matchup between those two, that is going to be must-watch basketball. All right, so transitioning over to what is going to be happening on Monday, and that is the start of the Sunshine Slam with USF taking on Clemson. Clemson comes in at 4-1. They are a top 40 KenPom team at the moment, and this was a squad that was in the Elite Eight a year ago. So high experience and expectations for the squad, as they do return a fair amount of the team, at least key pieces of the team that were part of that run a year ago. This is also a team that did lose at Boise State earlier this season as well. They lost 84-71 at Boise, and obviously USF beat Boise. So there is definitely, like, if you want to make the connection, well, if USF beat Boise, then USF should be able to beat Clemson. We shall see. They're going to be facing another high-powered guard just after seeing PJ Haggerty, and that's Chase Hunter. Hunter was on the Elite Eight team a year ago and one of the better players on that squad. Preseason All-ACC second team. He posted a career-high 30 against Boise. just last week. 12 made field goals in that one. And he's in that backcourt with them. Dylan Hunter is another guy you're going to have to keep an eye on, because this is someone who then had a career high of his own just the other night against Radford, where he had 29. And on the post, Ian Shefflin is the other All-ACC preseason pick. He was also picked to be on the All-ACC second team. He was also one of those to be recognized to be on the Karl Malone watch list for best power forward in the country. And so far, he's been averaging a double-double this season, a little over 3 assists a game as well. So multifaceted big man that Ian Shefflin is going to be against this USF squad. USF is going to need better performances than what they got the other night. Their offense was not good, just to put it plain and simple. They're going to need better performances out of Marcus Williams, better performances out of Duito Newberry. They're going to need better performance out of Tyrone Riley. Ryan Beasley was almost a non-factor in that game. So they're going to need their key pieces to be more prominent in this one if they're going to get a win, and if they're going to advance to likely play a Penn State team, a 5-0 Penn State team, which will be taking on 3-3 Fordham. And that Penn State team, if that is who they face, that's another squad that is going to have a familiar face, at least for those who are familiar with the rest of mid-major basketball. Ace Baldwin, who is at VCU, at Penn State, he's been averaging 16 points per game, so nearly 8 assists. He's shooting 43% from the field, over 2 steals a game. This was a guy that St. Mary's dealt with a couple seasons ago in the NCAA tournament, and was obviously one of the key circles, like scout guys that you're looking at. Baldwin is going to light it up. Baldwin is one of the key reasons why this Penn State team has got off to such a fast start. They did beat Virginia Tech 86-64 just a couple weeks ago. They're beating teams by 31 plus so far this year. Now, the schedule hasn't been great, but they're doing what they need to do against the teams that they have. And Ace Baldwin is a big part of that early success. So if USF does move on, that's likely who they're going to end up seeing. This Clemson squad, this is a team kind of similar, as we've talked about some of these other teams early on, is that they don't beat themselves. 10 turnovers a game. They're doing really well taking care of the basketball. USF also does a really good job of taking care of the basketball. Now, this is a team that shoots really well from three, 39% as a team. So defending the three-point line is going to be one of the keys for the Dons in this one, to make sure that that Clemson doesn't really get off to a fast start and really start to get into a rhythm from distance, much like we saw from Memphis. So one more game that I want to get into, one more contest, and it's not any of the multi-team events. It's a single road game, and that's going to be the Beavers heading to Dallas to take on North Texas. And this is a good North Texas squad. 4-1. There's top 75 in KenPom. They do have a win against a Power 4 team in Minnesota. They did lose a close one to McNeese State, a McNeese State team that a lot of people do have high hopes for. But the style of game that they are going to play is going to be to drag you out. This is a team that has a KenPom adjusted defensive rank of 51. They only allow teams to score 57 a game. They are +9 rebounding margin. Again, this is a team that is 4-1, and they only shoot 42% from the field as a team. They are going to make you work for every single basket. Now, I think that this Oregon State squad is very capable of being that type of grinded out team and really working for it. But I think they're also going to need a lift from somewhere else that we haven't maybe seen on a consistent basis. Now, one of those, and I'm going to apologize if I butcher the name, is Latoris Lelavicius. And he had 13 points against Oregon. I think his development and his continued growth is going to be really critical for this squad, because one of the things that, if this is going to be a grinded out game, if you're going to have that happen, you are going to, I think, need somebody to be able to stretch the floor out and be able to give you something from distance. Now, obviously Nate Kings has largely been that guy to this point, but he struggled against Oregon and he needed a different outlet. Josiah Lake also is not necessarily that volume shooter on that front, so you do need someone else to pick that up. Initially, it seemed like that was going to be Isaiah C., but he, to this point, and like, he's shooting 15% from three, so they need someone who's going to be more reliable on that front. And Lelavicius has been one of those guys who started to show through that he might be next consistent player from distance. We know how well Michael Retias played to this point. I expect him to kind of continue to do what he's been doing. Parsifala has obviously been a really good piece to this point. DeMarco Minor has been obviously one of the best guards in the conference to this point. But the challenge here is going to be just, can you get enough offense on a team that's going to grind you out and likely make sure that you're slowing this pace down? Oregon State to this point has actually really tried to speed teams up. And much like, this is going to be much like what we've seen from a St. Mary's squad for years and years. North Texas is going to try to play this in the 60s. They're going to make sure that the pace is at their level. They're going to try to make sure that they chase guys off the 3-point line. They're going to make you work. And I think the Beavers are fully capable of getting this win and getting out of North Texas with a very good win, which could end up being a quad 1, depending on what else happens throughout the course of the season. At the worst, this would be a quad 2 win for Oregon State. And it starts to build what could maybe is a resume. Now, because I talked about how like Oregon maybe was a missed opportunity, but this is also a team that honestly like doesn't have a ton of opportunities on it to get really good wins. But North Texas is there. That could be a really good win. UC Irvine is coming up, and they have yet to lose. That could be another one. Charleston and possibly Loyola are other opportunities that could be potential resume builders. Again, right now they're 4-1. Oregon State is. They're looking good. They just missed out on that win against the Ducks, but there's still opportunities. And then once you get in the conference play, then you can start to see, like, you start to pick up others of those wins, whether that be against Washington State, Santa Clara, even though obviously they've stumbled quite a bit. I think there's some opportunities, but they have to start somewhere. North Texas is going to be that first step. All right, well, that'll do it for this Feast Week edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube and your favorite streaming services. Follow along on social media at Post by Zach and at unofficial WCC pod. That also does include on Threads and Blue Sky at this stage. So wherever you are on social media, whether that be Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, head over there, follow along, and for additional content throughout the course of the week. All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope everyone has a great time watching some basketball and eating some turkey. And I'll catch up next week with the recaps and all of that. So one more time, happy Thanksgiving, and I will catch you later.